Kathy Reichs's latest novel is called Cold Bones. Kathy is one of the world's most successful crime and thriller writers. Her very first novel, Deja Dead, became a New York Times bestseller, and her Temperance Brennan series inspired the hit TV series Bones, which is based on her work and her novels. Kathy's also a forensic anthropologist and has consulted to medical examiners, to the police, travelled to Rwanda to testify at the UN Tribunal on Genocide, and helped exhume a mass grave in Guatemala. She's also assisted in the recovery of remains at the World Trade Center following the 9/11 attacks. Let's have a chat to Kathy Reichs. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kathy.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Congratulations on your latest book, Cold Bones. You have a big fan base in Australia and, of course, around the world. You are the queen of the page turner. Now, for readers and listeners who haven't got their hands on a copy of Cold Bones yet, can you tell us what it's about?
Oh, this one really harks back to earlier times in Tempe's career. It starts, she's in a good place. Her daughter, Katie, who's been in the military for 8 years, has retired from the military and returned to Charlotte, and much to Tempe's delight, gotten a home there. So they're moving her in. They're spent the day emptying box after box after box. So they break to go to Tempe's house for dinner. And what do they see on the porch but a box? And when they open it inside, they find a very fresh human eyeball. Katie, it turns out, has extraordinarily good vision. So she notices on the side of the eyeball are etched GPS coordinates. So, of course, our intrepid heroine has to follow that clue. They lead her to a Benedictine monastery where she makes, I'll just say, she makes another grisly discovery. Not long after, her boss, the medical examiner, sends her to collect a body, a mummified corpse hanging up from a tree in a state forest. It's an apparent suicide. But, and because I've done cases like that. But Tempe, something in her, a little voice in her head starts to say, these seem to be completely unrelated, but they're linked. There's something linking them. And eventually she figures out that what's happening is there's a copycat killer. Someone is mimicking cases from earlier in her career.
Now, of course, Tempe is Temperance Brennan, who is the protagonist of this book and of many of your novels. And a lot of people who hadn't yet discovered your protagonist through the television series Bones, which was obviously inspired by Temperance. But a lot of it comes from your background. I just want to take listeners back to your background as a forensic anthropologist. What attracted you to that career in the first place, if you can cast your mind back?
Actually, nothing. Excuse me. I trained to do bioarchaeology, to excavate and analyze the remains of very ancient skeletons, archaeologically recovered skeletons. But because I was the bones lady at the university, cops started bringing me cases when they would discover skeletons or partial, bones. And once I started doing that, I really liked, I love archaeology. It's fascinating, but you're not going to change anyone's life. You're going to get into long debates with your colleagues in the literature. But when you identify a missing family member or testify in a criminal trial, you are going to impact someone's life. And I really like the relevance of it. So I retrained, sat for my board certification examination, and began doing forensics, and have been doing that aspect of anthropology ever since.
So you start off in archaeology, you get into forensic anthropology and forensics with associated with crime. At what point, what was the trigger for, I'm going to write fiction?
Yeah, because I had never written fiction, and well, maybe my resume a little bit, but I'm an avid reader. I love to read thrillers and mysteries. Sometime in the early to mid 90s, I made full professor at the university. That's the highest rank you can attain. So I was free pretty much to do whatever I wanted to do. And I had just worked on a serial murder case. So I thought I had the freedom to try something new. I didn't want to write another textbook or scientific article. And I had a good case, an idea, a kernel, just the nugget, the central kernel for an idea for a storyline. So those came together in 1994. And that's when spring break of 94, because I was still teaching full time and commuting, doing forensic casework between North Carolina and Quebec in Canada. So I decided I would write a book, write a novel. I thought maybe this will introduce my science to a broader audience, because back then no one had heard of forensic anthropology. So I said to myself, I will finish this and submit it. I think I set a limit of 50. If I get 50 reject slips, I'll give it up and go back to my day job. So yeah, that's when I started it and why I started it.
So by then you were no stranger to writing, because your list of academic, it's a litany of publications that you've done in academia, but that's a completely different type of writing. So what did you, I don't know, like, I know it's a while ago, but can you remember what you did to learn the craft of writing fiction at the time?
Because I didn't tell anyone I was doing it, because if you write a novel in an English department, you're a hero. But if you write a novel in the science department, you're a little suspect. So I really didn't let anyone read any of it. And I just tried to write the kind of book I like to read. And I think one of the mistakes that academics or scientists make when they try to cross over into fiction, they love their discipline. Whether it's forensic entomology or fire and arson analysis or, whatever it happens to be, they love it. So they tend to put too much detail. So I think and that's not what the fiction reader wants. They want to learn something and they want to know it's accurate and they've actually learned something, but they don't want to read a textbook. So I think the key is you have to keep the science parts of it brief. You have to keep it accurate. You have to keep it entertaining, which is not critical for scientific writing. And you have to keep it jargon free. You can't rely on all the special terminology we use amongst ourselves as experts in an area. It's kind of the same skills you use in addressing a jury. You don't want to dumb it down, but you don't want them to put them to sleep or lose them either. So I think you keep it brief, keep it jargon free, and keep it as entertaining as possible.
So with the work that you do in forensics, and when you started writing novels, did you keep some kind of ideas file where you would go, oh, I'm going to put that in a novel? Or when you were writing your novels, you just kind of remembered cases and events and things that would suit that plot line?
Both. I do have a future stories file, it's called. I have a hard copy file and one on the computer. In the hard copy file, I've actually got articles I've clipped out of newspapers and things and thought, wow, that's it. Because my ideas don't always come from my cases. Sometimes they do. Many times they do, more so in the earlier books, I think. But sometimes they're what we used to call in the writer's room at Bones, ripped from the headlines. It's an idea. I saw some little thing in a newspaper article. The book just before this one, The Bone Code, that was a ripped from the headlines idea. I read a little blurb, a little story about a Chinese doctor. We now have the whole human genome mapped, and we now have the technology to modify it with the CRISPR. But the scientific communities agreed we're not going to use that knowledge and technology to create designer babies. But I read this article about this Chinese doctor who went ahead and did that. He changed the genomes of 2 unborn babies. So I thought, well, there's an interesting idea. What if someone does use this knowledge for nefarious purposes? So that's the central theme of the Bone Code. So that was a ripped from the headlines one, and some are directly from my cases, changing all the names, the dates, the details, everything. Some are things I've seen presentations at scientific meetings that I attend. Some are, things colleagues have told me about. So it's like any writer. My ideas come from a variety of sources.
So let's talk about this one, Cold, Cold Bones. Where did the idea for this one come from?
This one came from me. It came from my earlier books. I thought it would be fun for my readers so what happens in this case is this book draws on earlier books in the series. I thought it would be fun for my readers to not only do what thriller readers do, which is to try to solve the mystery, what's going on here, who's the bad guy or girl, but also to try to figure out which case is she harking back to, which book does this draw from, the mummified corpse hanging in the forest, or the disemboweled eyeball, or some of the other ones that show up as well. So I thought that would be a fun thing for my readers. So this one actually draws on my own earlier works.
How important is it though? Because a new reader could come to you now and still enjoy any of these books. So how important is it to you, or how conscious are you to make sure that that person's having a good experience and they don't have to have read all of the others or many of the others?
Yeah, and that's a challenge. That was the other thing about this book is, if you have never read one of my books, this will give you an idea about what some of the earlier books in the series are about. But that is a problem, or a challenge that every writer of a continuing character series has to face. For some people, Cold, Cold Bones may be the 21st book in the series that they've read. For some people, it may be the very first book. So you have to reintroduce in every single book your central premise. It's a forensic anthropologist. She works in the autopsy room. She goes to crime scenes, and the characters, your central cast of characters. There's Tempe Brennan, who's our main heroine, her boyfriend Ryan, the cop she works with. There's a core of people, and those have to be reintroduced each time. But you have to do it in a new and entertaining way every single time. You can't just narrative. Well, you could, but that would not be very, very engaging. So I've had the books open with her sitting at a faculty meeting, and she's bored. So she's beginning to write her autobiography. We get the information, who she is and what she's about. I've had the book open with her being cross-examined as an expert witness on the stand in a trial. So again, it brings out who she is and what she does. So that's a challenge, to have to do that over and over every single book, and yet, do it in a creative way.
So you've written so many novels now, you must have a system and a writing and a writing process that you're very familiar with. And before we unpack maybe how it's changed over the years, if we can just talk about this particular book, can you tell us how long between the idea and writing the first draft, and what kind of whether you know what's going to happen before you get into it?
Yeah, about 2/3 of the way through the book I'm currently writing, I will start to wander off and think about the next book. It begins, not seriously, but just have random thoughts, or take greater notice of things in the headlines or whatever. It begins as kind of vegetable soup, just disparate little things floating around in my brain. The idea of, the human genome, and the idea of, somebody modifying it for profit or whatever. And then eventually that congeals, and a storyline begins to emerge. I decide on setting. Where am I going to have my characters? Because they're mainly in Quebec or in the Carolinas, but not always. They've been all over the place. We can talk about that. And then what is the storyline going to be? What is the science I'm going to use to drive the solution? Because I write, good old fashioned murder mysteries. The difference is the solution is driven by science rather than just detective work or gut instinct or whatever. I do a little bit of outlining. Not much. I'm not much of an outliner. Let me correct that. I will outline maybe the first 6 to 10 chapters, just a paragraph for each one. I know where it's going to go from there. But after the first, that rough beginning outline, I just start writing. I do create a postmortem outline. As I finish each chapter, I do each chapter as a file, a separate file, and then I enter them into a master chapter. As I finish each chapter, I do add them to the outline, so that by the time I have finished writing the book, I do have an outline, so that if I have to go back and find something and change something, I tend to be a very linear writer. I start with chapter 1, and then I do chapter 2, chapter 3. My daughter's a writer, and if she's in a happy mood, she writes the love scene. And if she's in a dark mood, she writes the death scene. And no, I can't. That's wrong. I can't do it that way. So I do in a very linear way. But it's also a feedback process. I might be writing and suddenly I get a new idea, or suddenly I come across something that I do a lot of research as I write, and it leads you down these rabbit holes and things. And suddenly I might come across something that, wow, that's great. I'm going to use that. Then I have to go back and modify. So I have that sort of postmortem outline to know what happens where and where I need to go back and add or subtract or change or whatever.
So you have a post-mortem outline. So you're outlining in retrospect, apart from your first 6 or 7, or so chapters. But when you say the direction you're heading in, do you mean that the resolution, who done it, how they done it, and how it all hangs together? Is that what you mean? So you know that at the start?
I usually know what happened, what the motivation is. Because murder's the only crime. You have to have a motive. I mean, robbery, you don't have to worry about motive. Kidnapping, you usually don't have, it's money or it's political. You don't have to worry about motive. But murder, you have to know the motive. So I usually know that, and I know how it's going to be resolved because I've chosen forensic entomology, or I've chosen, mitochondrial DNA analysis from cat hair or whatever. I don't always know who the villain is until late in the story.
Really?
And I think what thriller writers do, what I do, is you point towards different people, which is okay. The red herring clues, those are okay, as long as they make sense and as long as you tie them off later on. So by doing that, you've set up that it could be more than one. And if you don't know, and I think your job as a thriller writer is to surprise your reader. I know if I read a thriller and I figure it out before the author tells me, I'm a little disappointed. So it's your job to surprise them, I think, with that twist at the end or whatever. So if I don't know who the villain is until quite late, then maybe they're not going to either.
That is fascinating, even after so many books, that you still have that process. So what kind of time frame, let's just take this latest book, do you, and is this latest book typical of the time frame in other books, do you take for that first draft?
Well, by contract, I do a book a year. So I get interrupted a lot. I just did a 3-week tour for Cold Bone. So I haven't written anything for a month. Anyway, I do a draft in a year. We've turned it around, and I've turned it in a year. We then do some editing. I've never really done a second draft. I do a lot of editing as I go. Right. When I open the chapter, I edit up to the point where I left off. And then I start writing because that brings me up to speed and whatever. So by the time I turn my manuscripts in, I've really edited them a lot. I will get, of course, editorial suggestions from my editors, editors do. And I almost always make those changes, but I've never had to do a really rewrite or a completely different draft or anything.
So you edit as you go. Now, has your writing process evolved or changed since the very early days? Because when you're new at stuff, you don't necessarily have a system. Over time, you kind of create one. Or did you pretty much start this way as well?
I started because I had to fit it in between commuting to do forensic casework and teaching full time at university. And I have 3 kids. My process was anytime I had a free block of time, write. You sit down and you write. And I did a lot of writing at 6 o'clock in the morning before I went on to campus, for the day. So I'm a very disciplined writer. I don't believe in writer's block. I don't believe that, you just, today I'm not feeling it, so I'm going to take the day off. No, my process is that anytime I have a free day, I write. And I stay at it. I try to get at it, not as early as I used to, because now I'm free to just focus on the writing. But I try to get at it in the morning. I'm a morning writer. I'm not good at, my son is also a writer, and he will start writing at like 10 o'clock at night and then write until 3 in the morning. And I know I can't do that. So I do write in the morning, and then
from about what time to what time?
Oh, I don't know. I write from I try to get at it 8:30ish. I play around with email. That's my form of, sharpening pencils and things. And then I'll write from 9 until 2 maybe. And then knock off for the day and do other things. But
do you aim for a word count, or you just put in those hours?
Do I aim for a word count? No, I've never thought in terms of word count. When I started writing, I didn't even know, about word count. I just had a sense of, okay, my book's going to be 35 chapters, 10 pages each, kind of. And that's still the way I think about it. And if I do 2 good pages a day, that's a good day, because I'm constantly editing,
Yes, it sounds like like you're doing, your first, second, third, fourth draft, all in the first draft.
I probably am. Stephen King once said to me, just get it down and stick it in a drawer, go away, and then come back. I just can't do it that way. I have to just keep working on it and polishing it as I go.
Now, when the television series was on, it was hugely popular, went for a very long time, many seasons. When that was on and you were involved, and you even wrote a number of the episodes, what was that like to write in a television script format? Because it is, again, very, very different. What did you have to do to get used to that format and the way in which the story had to be written?
The structure is similar. A TV episode will have what we call the A story, the main story, which is the crime, the B story, which is something going on in the lives of the characters. And then you might also have a C story going on with, subsidiary characters or some issue, maybe an arcing issue from other episodes. So that structure is similar in my novels. Both my young adult novels and my adult Temperance Brennan novels. What's different is that for television, you don't or film, it's the viewer is seeing the characters and the scene and the action. So you don't have to put the descriptive bits in. It really boils down to dialogue, maybe some action directions, but it boils down to dialogue. I remember I was shocked when I got the first, because I read all 246 scripts for the show for 12 years. I expected this big honking, thing. It's like 60 pages, including some additional things like pronunciation sheets and things like that. So it really boils down to just dialogue. Now, what's different in writing for TV is that you start out by doing what's called breaking the story in the writer's room. And that's a collective experience. You go in and you and the other staff writers just brainstorm. You go in and there's a terrifyingly white board, empty, blank whiteboard on the wall. And for our show, it was divided into 6 acts. And by the end of a week, maybe 2 weeks, you have an outline. You have your A story, your B story, very, very rough outline of how your episode is going to take place. You then have to, you as the writer, and each episode has usually a single writer. You then pitch that to the showrunner, and he approves eventually, makes gives you notes, which are suggestions for changes. Then you get sent to outline. Then you write a very detailed outline. I'm thinking it was 10, 15 pages, single spaced computer. Then you pitch that. Then you get notes back. And then you get sent to script. And then you actually write the script. So I'm not used to having that much involvement of other people in the process.
Collaboration. Is it, I mean, when you're so used to writing, it's such a solitary thing, right? Writing a novel. Is it actually really quite annoying?
No, I really enjoyed that. It was
really
exhilarating. Yeah, no, I enjoyed, well, not getting all the feedback and plus then you turn the script in and they change everything anyway, because of factors you don't maybe know about, like there's a particular actor unavailable or budget. I wrote one where our opening scene was completely changed because it would have been very expensive to film it that way. So yeah, I'm not used to having my work changed like that, but I do enjoy the process of working with the other writers. And then when you're the writer on an episode, you're expected to be present on set and on location. So it's a feedback then. There may be things that aren't working or things that one of the actors objects to or wants to change or something like that. So you have to be there to be able to make changes, ongoing changes.
Do you do you have some kind of system or I don't know what that might look like, of trying to number one, keep things fresh. Number two, make sure you're not repeating anything or things that are too similar. I was reading a book by a very well-known author the other day, and then I read another book like 3 books later, and it was really the same scene, the same character and all of that. I think she's attached to that thing and she's forgotten she's written it. Do you have anything of that nature, or you got a really good memory?
Well, I worry about that. And particularly this book, I did a huge amount of going back and researching myself, all this minutia that I had created in these earlier books, because thriller readers are very savvy. And if you had a character in book 7, who is 5'4", that character better still be 5'4", 10 books later. So you better not mess it up. So I didn't remember, where was Andrew Ryan's mother born? So I spent a lot of time going back for this book, because this book does draw on earlier cases, and me and my assistant as well, double checking to keep facts straight. So that doesn't really answer your question. I am aware of and try to avoid repeating the same. I mean, obviously there's some repetition. There is a what do you call that? A formula. Somebody gets killed and bones or a body turns up and they identify it. They figure out, who it was, and then somebody gets caught. Now it's a mystery, but I do try to do it differently each time and not rely on the same old tropes, book after book. That's hard.
Do you still do forensic work?
I pretty much retired about, 3 years ago. There came a point where I was writing a young adult book, writing a Temperance Brennan book, and writing a Bones episode every year, and then trying to commute back and forth doing the casework. So I'm really now just focusing on writing the adult novels.
How is that possible, to be writing all of those things and doing forensic?
Yeah, I know. It was, yeah.
So now that this book is out, obviously, does that mean the next one is already written, or you're in the process of writing it?
I'm in the process. I will be in the process once I finish this book tour. Yes, I'm about a third of the way through it. So don't tell my editor that. I should be further along. So I'll get back to that Monday. I'm giving myself this weekend, and then Monday I'll get back to that. It's called The Bone Hacker, and it's scheduled, I think, to be out in August of 2023.
Oh, fantastic. Now, one of the things that I mentioned was, I think you're the queen of the page turner, and you devour your books. You can't put them down, and you have a great technique of at the end of a chapter, the reader simply can't not turn the page. What do you do, or what are you consciously aware of when you're writing to ensure the reader does that?
Well, I'm consciously aware of the size of my chapters. I try to keep them balanced and relatively short. So when I start a chapter, I have a vision of, what's going to happen in that chapter. It has to be something to move the story forward, or something with conflict in the lives of, every writer knows that. But I do anticipate at the end to try to end it on a note that, as you say, the reader is going to say, what? What? And okay, I'll read just one more. So I do very blatantly use the cliffhangers.
So do you instinctively know where that is, or do you sometimes write beyond it and then go, oh, actually, I'm going to just delete all that?
Occasionally, yeah. Or chop it and put that in the next chapter. Sometimes I do that. I end up that the chapter is just longer than it should be. So I chop it and move it over to the next chapter. And then I probably have to modify the ending of that chapter somehow. When
you're writing crime and thriller and murders and, dark stuff, and your day-to-day, well, you're retired now, but your day-to-day work is also involved with crime and all of that. How do you manage not letting that consume your brain totally? Or is it easy? Have you found it easy to compartmentalize?
I've always found it easy to compartmentalize between, in general, I guess. You have, first of all, you have to be able to do that as a forensic scientist. You have to be, at least those of us in the medical legal end of it who are working with the victims themselves. We keep telling ourselves we work with the dead, but we work for the living. Still, you have to figure, you can't get emotionally involved with your subjects, with your victims. Otherwise, you won't do the best job for them. So you have to stay somewhat distant from them. And that can be harder in some cases than others. And at the end of the day, you have to be able to leave it behind at the lab. If not, you're just not going to survive in that environment. That's not the job for you. You have to be able to detach.
Wow. And you obviously figured that out from day one?
Or just instinctively, that was my makeup.
Okay.
We have not interns like Tempe has on television, but we have students, I guess, that come in or even young cops sometimes that come do a rotation at the autopsy room, and they realize, this is not for me. Excuse me, and switch to something else. You just have to have, have that. This is 3 weeks of being on tour. It's not,
yes.
not it's just, I'm drinking this coat your throat tea that Bill Clinton talked about when he was running for president, that this really got his throat through. Anyway. So
you drink your tea. Well, I have to say that listeners or viewers, that whether you are new to Temperance Brennan, or whether you're new to these books, or whether this is your 21st novel, it is a fantastic read. So congratulations on yet another brilliant book. We always end with, what are your top 3 tips for aspiring writers who dream to be having their, 21st book in a series, or their, 30th novel, or whatever number you're up to now? What are your top 3 tips to them?
My top tip is probably number 1, number 2, and number 3 is write. Find that time you can sit down and write, and don't allow yourself excuses, not whether it's 2 hours a week or 2 hours a day or all day on Saturday, or, after work on whatever that block of time is. Be disciplined, sit down and write. You may not like what you write one day, but you can always modify it. You can always edit it. But if you cannot edit a blank page, so sit down and write. If you write 1 decent page a day, at the end of a year, you've got 365 pages. That's a book. That would probably be my tip 1, 2, and 3.
Brilliant. Oh, that's great. I think, right, and right.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Kathy.
Thank you.